voice of God weapons. Voice of God weapons are the colloquial term given to the projects that the U.S. government has conducted to investigate the possibility of producing audible sounds within the human brain through the use of a directed energy weapon utilizing pulse-modulated microwave radiation. These sounds range from short buzzes, clicks, and hisses to, theoretically, perceptible human speech present in the human brain, which appears to come from nowhere at all, hence the term voice of God. To begin the story of how research into this technology began, we need to go back to 1953. That year, during a series of health and safety tests at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, American technicians conducted standard background radiation testing when they detected something very unusual. Microwave signals beaming directly at the building. The signals varied between 2.5 and 4 gigahertz and appeared to be deliberately targeting the embassy. What made this discovery particularly unsettling was that the signal wasn't a random emission. It was clearly directed with intent, originating from a nearby apartment building approximately 100 meters east of the 10th-floor embassy. The highest concentration of these microwaves targeted floors 3 through 8, where most of the diplomatic and intelligence activities were taking place. The discovery was immediately classified. For years, American officials would monitor these emissions without disclosing their existence to the majority of embassy personnel or the public. The signal was weak, just 1/1000th of the maximum permissible leakage allowed from a typical microwave oven, so seemingly not enough to cause any immediate physical harm. In 1964, 11 years after the initial discovery, the United States finally implemented shielding against the microwaves and continued to monitor the radiation. It was then found in 1975 that the beams had significantly increased in intensity. It wasn't until February of 1976, a full 23 years after the initial discovery, that the existence of these mysterious microwave beams was finally acknowledged publicly and to many embassy staff who had been working in the building for years without knowing that they were being irradiated. However, behind closed doors, research into the Moscow signal had been underway for over a decade. The United States sourced the signal back to suspected Soviet forces and theorized numerous different possible explanations for the microwaves, ranging from simple electronic jamming to the idea that the technology was being used to harm the health, minds, or behavior of the American embassy staff. In October 1965, Richard Cesaro, an official at the Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, known today as DARPA, sent a secret memorandum to the agency's director, Charles Hertzfeld. This memo justified the initiation of a special research program codenamed Project Pandora. The White House had tasked multiple agencies, including the State Department, the CIA, and the Pentagon, with investigating the microwave emissions. ARPA's specific role was to study the effects of microwave radiation on human physiology and cognition. Thus was born DARPA Program Plan 562, better known by its codename, Project Pandora. Before diving deeper into Project Pandora and DARPA's experiments into these voice of God weapons, today's sponsor, Private Internet Access, has something to say about the digital weapons which threaten your online life every single day. Data brokers, hackers, and other malicious parties are constantly trying to steal people's information, especially from public Wi-Fi networks, where all of your information is essentially out in the open and up for grabs. However, Private Internet Access's VPN service can help you to fight back. Their VPN operates as an application you can run on your phone, computer, or tablet, which hides your IP address and encrypts all the information you send over the internet. A subscription to private internet access shields your information from the prying eyes and hands of those looking to exploit your personal information. I always have my VPN enabled when I'm out working at libraries or coffee shops, just to make sure nobody is trying to intercept my personal information, as it happens more often than you'd think. Private internet access's VPN also allows you to change your geographic location to different countries, allowing you to view movies and TV shows on streaming services only hosted in certain regions. For example, Oppenheimer isn't currently on Netflix in the US, but using private internet access, you can switch your IP address over to Ukraine where it is listed, and all of a sudden it'll pop up in Netflix. PIA also has a policy to never record or store user data, and this has been proven in court and in third-party audits numerous different times. By signing up today with my link at piavpn.com/fortune, you will get 83% off your subscription, along with your first 4 months absolutely free. That comes out to just $2.03 a month for one of the world's most trusted VPNs. Thank you so much to PIA for sponsoring today's video. Now, back to the iceberg. The choice to head Project Pandora with Richard Cesaro would prove to be problematic. Cesaro was a propulsion expert with zero background in biological sciences, but he relished running a top-secret project with the White House and CIA attention. He approached the assignment with an enthusiasm that apparently disturbed his peers. He quickly became less invested in understanding the biological mechanisms involved and more focused on developing an actual microwave weapon. Pentagon scientists like physicist Bruno Augenstein warned that DARPA's push risked repeating the ethical missteps of past human experimentation programs like MKUltra, noting internal DARPA resistance to pursuing such crackpot research, as he called it. Despite these objections, under Richard's stewardship, it indeed strayed from controlled physiological research into early Cold War microwave weapons exploration. Initial experiments on the effects of microwave radiation used monkeys trained to press levers for food rewards while exposed to microwaves mimicking those of the Moscow signal. By December 1966, Cesaro claimed a single monkey showed work stoppages under irradiation, declaring that they had achieved, quote, penetration of the central nervous system. He pushed for human testing under the codename Bizarre, proposing to expose 8 Fort Detrick personnel to microwaves while keeping both subjects and medical staff uninformed about the true purpose. Despite this, scientific scrutiny would soon unravel his claims. As internal scientists began to review his work, they found that the experiments didn't have solid baselines or consistent protocols, making the results unreliable. Instead of following standard research practices such as using control groups and peer review, the project relied on secretive, classified procedures and sometimes drew sweeping conclusions from very limited data, like claiming mind control effects based on the behavior of a single monkey. When the data was finally examined carefully, it turned out there was no real evidence that the microwaves directly affected behavior at all. Outside the failures of Project Pandora, another researcher was making legitimate discoveries about how microwaves could interact with the human brain. American neuroscientist Alan H. Frey was the first to publish research on what would become known as the microwave auditory effect, or the Frey effect. In his 1961 paper, Human Auditory System Response to Modulated Electromagnetic Energy, in the Journal of Applied Physiology, Frey was able to document phenomena which Project Pandora had tried and failed to uncover. In his experiments, Dr. Frey was able to induce audible sounds from appropriately pulsed microwave radiation within the brains of his subjects. This was done from distances ranging from inches to hundreds of feet from the transmitter. Frey discovered that the perceived loudness correlated with peak power density rather than average power density, hence the necessity of high-powered microwave pulses. Subjects described the induced sounds variously as a buzz, clicking, hiss, or knocking, depending on several transmitter parameters, for example, the pulse width and pulse repetition rate. By adjusting these parameters, Frey could produce even more dramatic effects, including the sensation of violent banging from within the head or creating a, quote, pins and needles sensation. Frey even tested his methods on deaf subjects, finding that they indeed still experienced the auditory sensations. This finding suggests that the effect does not rely on traditional hearing mechanisms. Instead, the effect is believed to result from thermoelastic expansion of brain tissue, which generates pressure waves that are transmitted to the cochlea, where nerve impulses related to hearing are produced. This all results in the perception of sound without the presence of any actual sound waves. The implications of this discovery were profound. If microwaves could be used to generate sounds directly within a person's head, the potential applications, both beneficial and sinister, were enormous. Decades after these Cold War-era experiments, the U.S. military would develop technologies that built upon some of these discoveries. One such system was Medusa, mob access deterrent using silent audio. Medusa is a directed energy weapon which applies the principles of Frey's microwave audio effect to create uncomfortable or disorienting sensations in targeted individuals. Unlike traditional acoustic weapons, Medusa seemingly had the potential to transmit intelligible speech directly into an individual person's head without surrounding individuals hearing anything. The psychological impact of suddenly hearing voices with no apparent source could be severely disorienting, making it a disturbing yet effective crowd control tool. The development of Medusa represents the modern evolution of research that began with those early investigations into the Moscow signal and the Frey effect. While Project Pandora failed to find evidence that simple microwave exposure could control minds, the discovery that pulsed microwaves could create auditory sensations opened the door to more sophisticated applications. Medusa didn't need to control minds. It simply needed to create confusion, discomfort, and psychological impact through the perception of sound, where there was none. Medusa originated in 2003 when the U.S. Navy awarded a small business innovative research contract to Waveband Corporation to explore whether the microwave auditory effect could be harnessed as a non-lethal crowd control technology, as well as to investigate whether the microwave pulses could be used to transmit speech directly into the skull without the use of sound waves. During the Phase 1 development period between 2003 and 2004, Waveband demonstrated in laboratory settings that a portable, low-power microwave emitter could reliably produce uncomfortable auditory sensations that ranges up to 50 meters, causing test subjects to vacate a target zone. Encouraged by these early results, the Navy extended the contract into Phase 2 from 2005 to 2006. During this period, another company, Sierra Nevada Corporation, acquired Waveband and continued refining Medusa's design, allowing the prototype to switch between wide area modes and narrow beam modes for individual engagement. Throughout 2006 and 2007, prototype field trials conducted at the Department of Defense test ranges validated that operators could modulate pulse repetition frequencies to vary the perceived pitch and intensity of the internal sounds, with subjects reporting sensations likened to knocks, hisses, or even a loud, high-pitched buzz that forced immediate retreat from the beam. Concurrent safety studies, however, raised red flags. Bioengineering experts at the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Washington warned that achieving speech-level intelligibility would require power densities so high that significant heat would be produced within the brain, cooking it as if it were actually inside a microwave oven. By 2008, Sierra Nevada formally suspended Medusa's development. They cited both ethical concerns, chiefly the lack of informed consent protocols in potential real-world use, and insufficient safety margins to prevent permanent neurological damage under worst-case exposure scenarios. In the public eye, and according to the unclassified documents we have access to regarding these Voice of God weapons, this would appear to be the end of the paper trail. Except for one small hiccup which occurred in 2004 on the U.S. Army's official government website. Users browsing through the U.S. Army's public thesaurus site on army.mil in 2004 had the potential of finding a very strange entry describing voice-to-skull devices. This page defines a V2K device as a, quote, non-lethal weapon which includes 1. A neuroelectromagnetic device which uses microwave transmission of sound into the skull of persons or animals by way of pulse-modulated microwave radiation, and 2. A silent sound device which can transmit sound into the skull of person or animals. Note, the sound modulation may be voice or audio subliminal messages. It appears the site was first published in 2004, with its earliest capture on archive.org appearing on January the 12th of that year. However, from what I can tell, according to the Internet Archive, by the 28th of February, just over a month later, this entry seems to have been permanently removed from the website. This page's existence has been all but forgotten on the modern internet, but the fact that it did exist on an official website of the US military before quickly being pulled is very strange and may indicate the continued classified existence or research of these weapons within the US military. Silverstein Insurance Policy on the World Trade Center. In the summer of 2001, a real estate transaction took place in New York City that would later become the subject of intense scrutiny and speculation. Larry Silverstein, a prominent real estate mogul, acquired a 99-year lease on the World Trade Center complex from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The timing of this acquisition has raised eyebrows among many investigators and researchers, as it occurred less than 2 months before the catastrophic events of September 11th. The deal, finalized on July 24, 2001, marked the first time in the building's 33-year history that they had changed hands from public to private ownership. Silverstein Properties, along with Westfield America, paid $3.2 billion for this lease, with Silverstein himself reportedly putting down just $14 million of his own money, while the rest came from investors and bank loans. The financial aspects of Silverstein's World Trade Center deal become even more intriguing when examining the insurance provisions he negotiated. Upon acquiring the lease, Silverstein immediately insured the property for $3.55 billion, which specifically covered against terrorist attacks. More remarkably, the insurance policy included a peculiar provision that would prove enormously beneficial in the aftermath of 9/11. It contained language about what constituted an occurrence. After the attacks, Silverstein's legal team used this language to argue that the 2 plane strikes constituted 2 separate occurrences, effectively doubling the potential insurance payout. This aggressive legal strategy sparked years of litigation. While Silverstein initially sought $7.1 billion in insurance claims, he ultimately collected $4.55 billion, still significantly more than the $3.55 billion face value of the policy. For a moment, I want you to put a pin on that figure, that Silverstein would eventually walk away with $4.55 billion. Asbestos was originally used as fireproofing throughout much of the World Trade Center during their construction in the late 60s and early 70s. As time went on since they were built, the data mounted that asbestos was a definite, serious carcinogen. Full removal was thus considered both necessary and prohibitively expensive. Estimates placed the cost of complete asbestos abatement at over $1 billion, a staggering sum that would have fallen entirely on Silverstein under the terms of the lease. The challenge of removing the asbestos while keeping the buildings operational made the task even more daunting. Yet just 7 weeks after taking control, the towers were destroyed in the 9/11 attacks, eradicating the buildings and, along with them, the massive asbestos liability. In the end, instead of needing to face this asbestos issue, Silverstein walked away with his $4.55 billion in insurance payouts and turned what would have been a massive financial liability into a huge payday. Perhaps one of the most discussed aspects of Larry Silverstein's connection to 9/11 revolves around his absence from the World Trade Center on that fateful morning. By his own admission, Silverstein had established a rigid personal routine that included breakfast meetings at Windows on the World, the restaurant located at the top of the North Tower, every single morning. Yet on September 11th, 2001, Silverstein deviated from this well-established pattern. When later questioned about his whereabouts, Silverstein explained that he had a dermatologist appointment that morning, which his wife had scheduled and insisted he keep.
Where were you on September 11th?
I was home. And the only reason I wasn't where I was every morning, my mornings were spent usually at a breakfast meeting at Windows, an 8 o'clock breakfast meeting, Windows, the top of it, right? And then going down to visit with my tenants, my new tenants. My wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I remember dressing to go to the doctor. I'm finally saying to my wife, I said, sweetheart, I've got so much to do downtown. I got to cancel this. I've got to go downtown. And she said, you're not going to cancel this appointment. You're going to the dermatologist. And, having been married now to the same woman for 46 years, you get this sense of determination on occasion, their voices. And I said, okay.
This arbitrary appointment apparently saved his life. Beyond Silverstein himself, his 2 children, who both worked at the World Trade Center, were also conspicuously absent that morning. His son Roger and daughter Lisa, both executives at Silverstein Properties, had meetings scheduled outside the towers on that particular day. The entire Silverstein family's absence on a day when they would normally have been in the buildings has been characterized by some as an extraordinary coincidence, and by others as something more sinister. I'd just like to note here that I'm aware we're diving into controversial territory, and that my purpose here is simply to present perspectives which challenge the accepted narrative. I believe history should always be confronted to prove that it stands up to legitimate scrutiny, even if the official narrative is indeed correct. That being said, after 9/11, Silverstein's financial position improved dramatically. Beyond the insurance payouts, he maintained development rights for the World Trade Center site and received substantial government subsidies for reconstruction. The new buildings, constructed with modern specifications and materials, represented a significant upgrade over the originals. Some investigators have calculated that Silverstein stood to lose millions annually on the original World Trade Center properties due to maintenance and renovation costs, whereas the post-9/11 rebuilding provided him with state-of-the-art properties and generous government assistance, a remarkable financial turnaround that would not have been possible without the attacks. This dramatic reversal of financial fortune from a questionable investment to a highly profitable enterprise has been cited by conspiracy theorists as evidence of motive. While correlation does not prove causation, the financial benefits that accrued to Silverstein following the tragedy have remained a central focus of those questioning his role. Are all of these facts mere coincidences added to the pile of apparent miracles that happened on that day? Or is all of this evidence of something more? For the sake of only reporting objective information, I'm not going to be diving any further into speculation. I think it's important that people are given the actual facts of what happened during these historical events, and from there they can analyze for themselves and come to their own conclusions without being told what to think. Regardless of your interpretations of this information, I encourage all of you to share your different views in the comments below. Home printers leave invisible tracking dots. Imagine you print a confidential document at home, place it in an envelope, and mail it anonymously to expose wrongdoing within an organization you take part in. You've taken every precaution. No fingerprints, no DNA, no revealing details. What you don't realize is that hidden within that seemingly innocent sheet of paper lies an invisible fingerprint left without your knowledge that leads directly back to you. This isn't science fiction or some distant dystopian future. This is happening right now and has likely already happened to you on almost every document printed in homes and offices across the world. Your printer has been secretly tagging your documents with nearly invisible yellow dots, which reveal exactly which printer produced the document, when it was printed, and, with the right digging, who it was printed by. These tiny yellow dots, known officially as Machine Identification Codes, or MICs, represent one of the most widespread yet little-known surveillance mechanisms in everyday technology. They are virtually impossible to detect with the naked eye, appearing as faint yellow specks measuring just 0.1 millimeter in diameter, strategically scattered across the entire page in a coded pattern. The yellow color was deliberately chosen because it's the least noticeable on white paper, especially under normal lighting. But illuminate that same page with a blue LED light or examine it under a microscope, and the truth emerges. A constellation of dots forming a simple yet sophisticated encoding system. The origin of these tracking dots traces back to a collaboration between the U.S. government and printer manufacturers in the mid-1980s. The U.S. Secret Service, concerned about the rising threat of counterfeiting as color copying technology improved, approached the Japanese Ministry of Finance to address the issue of fake currencies produced using color copiers. Xerox pioneered this encoding mechanism for its DocuColor line of printers, and in 1993 was granted a patent specifically describing the use of yellow dots to identify the source of a printed document. The original justification was seemingly reasonable, to prevent the counterfeiting of currency and other secure documents. What began with Xerox and Canon quickly spread throughout the industry, becoming a standard implemented by virtually every major manufacturer of color laser printers, all intentionally without informing the consumer. The public remained completely unaware of this tracking system for decades. It wasn't until October 2004 that the curtain was partially pulled back, when Dutch authorities used the tracking dots to identify counterfeiters who had used a Canon color laser printer. A month later, PC World magazine reported that the machine identification code had been used for decades in some printers, silently enabling law enforcement to identify and track those using the technology. Even then, the full extent of the surveillance capability remained secretive, with manufacturers reluctant to acknowledge the feature's existence or to explain exactly what information was being encoded in our documents. You may be wondering how these dots actually encode information. When you print a document on a color laser printer, the device embeds a grid of 15 by 8 yellow dots throughout the page. This grid pattern repeats across the entire document, carefully offset to ensure the grids don't overlap. The dots form a binary code, much like the punch cards used in early computing, where the presence or absence of a dot in a specific location represents a 1 or a 0. Each row in the grid encodes different pieces of information. The entire system operates at the firmware level of the printer, meaning it's hardwired into the device's basic functionality and is nearly impossible for average users to disable or circumvent. The information contained within these yellow dots is far more extensive than most people realize. Embedded within this grid is your printer's serial number, the model information, as well as a timestamp showing exactly when the document was printed. This combination of data creates a unique fingerprint that can be traced back to the specific device used to create the document. In cases where the printer was purchased with a credit card, registered for a warranty, or connected to the internet, that trail can easily lead directly back to you. It's a forensic tool hidden in plain sight, secretly documenting your activities with every page you print. The implications of this covert tracking system became dramatically apparent in June 2017, when Reality Winner, a former intelligence specialist, was arrested for leaking classified NSA information about Russian interference in the 2016 U.S. election. The document, as detailed by Wikipedia and CBS News, revealed Russian military attempts to interfere with the 2016 election by hacking a U.S. voting software supplier and sending phishing emails to over 120 local election officials in November of 2016. It indicated that Russian hackers accessed voter registration rolls, though it was unclear if any changes were made. The document she leaked contained the yellow tracking dots, unbeknownst to The Intercept. The Intercept would then approach the NSA with the document in an attempt to verify its authenticity and receive comment, a mistake which would later be cited as a, quote, deeply embarrassing newsroom failure by the publisher's co-founder, Glenn Greenwald. NSA security researchers were given the document and, upon examining the paper, quickly located and decoded these dots, revealing the exact time the document was printed. 6:20 a.m. on May 9th, 2017, along with the serial number of the printer used by Winner. While the FBI has never officially confirmed that these tracking dots led to Winner's identification, the timeline of events and the document's traceability through these dots strongly suggest they played a crucial role in her rapid apprehension. Within just hours of the document's publication, authorities had identified and arrested her. Even though she was trying to do the right thing, she was arrested for the transmission of national defense information and was sentenced to 5 years and 3 months in federal prison. This wasn't an isolated incident. The Secret Service has reportedly used printer tracking dots in numerous investigations to trace documents back to their sources. The technology is especially valuable in cases involving ransom notes, threatening letters, and leaked classified information. What makes this surveillance mechanism so effective is its invisibility, both physically and in the public psyche. The vast majority of people still have no idea that their printer is essentially signing their name to every document they produce, no matter what they're printing, creating an unbroken chain of evidence that can be followed directly back to them. Consider for a moment the essential role that anonymous printed communication has played throughout history. From political dissidents circulating banned texts to whistleblowers exposing corruption. The ability to distribute information anonymously has been a cornerstone of political and social change. This tracking system significantly harms the capability of ordinary people to employ anonymity in printed materials. Of course, there are certain workarounds. One could purchase, say, a used printer from a secondhand store without connecting the device to the internet, but to the uninformed, which again is the majority of people, this factor would simply not be considered. In countries with authoritarian regimes, these tracking dots could literally be a matter of life and death for activists and journalists attempting to share information critical of those in power. What's particularly chilling is that there was never any public debate about implementing this technology. No legislation was passed, no consent was requested, and no notice was given. It simply appeared in our homes. I advise vigilance to anyone who uses a printer to send sensitive information. There's no need to be paranoid here, but in certain, albeit rare cases, this information may be vital in protecting yourself. This revelation about printer tracking dots should make us be a little bit more aware of how other devices in our homes may be used to track our behaviors. Our phones, speakers, cars, and other household appliances all have increasing capabilities of being able to track our activities in ways we may not be able to comprehend or understand yet until it's too late. Sacred geometry. Hidden within the swirling patterns of seashells, the branching of trees, and even the very structure of the galaxies themselves, there appears to exist a sort of hidden language, a code seemingly written into the fabric of reality itself. Repeating patterns can be seen all throughout nature, ranging from the finest components of creation to the largest astronomical structures. These natural patterns have been studied by ancient civilizations, and they have been rediscovered by modern science. These patterns surround us daily, manifesting in ways most people never recognize or even notice. We'll begin with the Fibonacci sequence, named after the Italian mathematician Leonardo Fibonacci, who introduced it to Western mathematics in the year 1202. This seemingly simple sequence begins with 0 and 1, with each subsequent number being the sum of the two preceding ones. This leads to the string of numbers 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, and so on, continuing infinitely. This precise numerical sequence manifests with uncanny regularity throughout the natural world, appearing so consistently that many have questioned whether it represents evidence of intelligent design. One of the most amazing examples of the Fibonacci sequence in nature is the way seeds grow in a sunflower. If you look closely at the center of a sunflower, you'll notice the seeds are arranged in spirals. If you count the spirals of seeds going one way, and then count them going the other way, the numbers you get are almost always two Fibonacci numbers, like 34 and 55, or 55 and 89. This happens because the sunflower uses a special angle, about 137.5 degrees, to place each new seed. This angle is called the golden angle, and it's related to the golden ratio, a number that, like the Fibonacci sequence, pops up all over nature and art. As it turns out, by following the principles of the Fibonacci sequence and the golden angle, the sunflower achieves the most efficient possible arrangement of seeds, packing them as tightly and efficiently as possible without large gaps or wasted space. This helps it grow more seeds all within the same space, making the most of its sunlight and nutrients. What looks like a simple, beautiful pattern of nature actually appears to be an impossibly intelligent mathematical design that nature apparently figured out on its own by accident. These numbers appear with such statistical improbability across countless species that some believe it suggests something more profound may be at work. The golden ratio, approximately 1.618, emerges when dividing adjacent Fibonacci numbers. As the sequence progresses, this quotient converges closer and closer to the golden ratio. This proportion appears throughout nature, art, and architecture, and is often described as the mathematical formula for beauty itself. Even looking at the human body, the ratio between various body parts, from your head to your feet, your finger joints, even the spiral of your ear, follows this divine proportion. Even the human face appears to be considered most beautiful when the mouth and nose are each positioned at golden sections of the distance between the eyes and the bottom of the chin. This isn't limited to humans. Similar proportions exist throughout the animal kingdom, suggesting the possibility of some kind of a universal blueprint for organic development. The spiral arms of our Milky Way galaxy follow logarithmic spirals of approximately 12 degrees, the same mathematical pattern found in nautilus shells and hurricane formations. DNA molecules measured in angstroms, equal to a 100 millionth of a centimeter, are observed to be 34 angstroms long by 21 angstroms wide for each full cycle of their double helix spiral. Both Fibonacci numbers. Even the cochlea of our inner ear follows these blueprints. Similar spirals seen in the sunflower also appear in pine cones, pineapples, and, perhaps most dramatically, in Romanesco broccoli. This vegetable, with its mesmerizing spirals and intricate structure, is frequently described as a natural fractal, a geometric pattern that repeats itself at different scales. Each spiraled cone on the Romanesco's surface is a perfect miniature replica of the entire vegetable, creating a self-similar pattern that theoretically could continue infinitely if biological constraints didn't limit the growth. The branching patterns of trees, the structure of river networks, the outline of coastlines, the formation of clouds, and even the tiny alveoli in our lungs all display fractal properties. Inside our bodies, nerve cells, which function through processes at the cell surface, form fractal patterns that maximize surface area within a limited volume, a critical adaptation for proper neural function. Why does nature so consistently employ these specific mathematical patterns? Is it merely efficient design through natural selection? Even if this is the truth, it is astonishingly beautiful, miraculous if it truly all did happen on accident, out of nowhere through sheer universal chaos. However, some argue that these patterns serve as evidence of some kind of fundamental blueprint of creation itself, a sort of cosmic fingerprint embedded in reality at all scales. This idea takes us beyond simple observations of natural patterns and into the realm of sacred symbols that have been revered across cultures for millennia. One of the most significant of these is the flower of life, a geometric pattern consisting of 19 equally overlapping circles arranged with six-fold symmetry. This symbol has been discovered in ancient sites worldwide, with the earliest known depictions found in the Temple of Osiris in Egypt. Some scholars believe the symbol may have represented Ra's eyes in Egyptian cosmology. The flower of life is believed to represent the cycle of creation, depicting how all life emerges from a single source, represented by the central circle. Sacred geometers believe this symbol contains the most fundamental patterns of the universe, a literal blueprint of creation containing the basic patterns from which everything from atoms to cells to planets is constructed. Sacred geometry finds perhaps its most visible expression in the great architectural achievements of human civilization. The Parthenon in Athens, constructed between 447 to 432 BC, incorporates the golden ratio throughout its design, from its overall proportions to the spacing of its columns. The ratio between the width of the building and its height approximates the golden ratio, creating what many consider the perfect balance of form. Similar proportions appear in the Notre Dame Cathedral, where the relationships between various architectural elements, from the placement of the rose window to the proportions of the facade, follow golden proportions. These aren't coincidental alignments, but deliberate design choices reflecting the belief that sacred proportions create harmony that resonates with the human soul. Leonardo da Vinci explicitly incorporated sacred geometry into his artwork, most famously in the Vitruvian Man, which demonstrates how the human body embodies divine proportions. The drawing illustrates how the human form fits perfectly within both a circle and a square, geometric shapes considered fundamental to cosmic order. Da Vinci, like many Renaissance artists, studied these proportions extensively, believing that by aligning his work with these cosmic principles, he could create art of transcendent beauty. A belief that appears to have panned out, with his name and work having become timeless in the human story. Perhaps no architectural structures have generated more speculation regarding sacred geometry than the pyramids of Egypt, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza. Built with astonishing precision around 2560 BC, this structure embodies numerous mathematical relationships that seem impossible for its time. The pyramid's orientation aligns almost perfectly with true north, with an error of less than 1/10 of a degree, despite being built thousands of years before the magnetic compass. This, astonishingly, is less error than most modern buildings have. Maybe most intriguing of all, the latitude coordinate for the Great Pyramid, 29.9792458 degrees north, exactly matches the speed of light in a vacuum, 299,792,458 meters per second. I suppose it's possible that this is a coincidence, but such precise alignments have led many researchers to question whether these ancient builders possessed advanced mathematical knowledge far beyond what conventional history acknowledges. Some religious scholars propose that the consistency of sacred geometric patterns across nature represents mathematical proof of intelligent design, God's signature written into creation itself. Whether these patterns serve as evidence of some sort of divine creative intelligence or are just a complex coincidence, the elegance found in every corner of the universe is overwhelming to contemplate. Industrial society and its future. I'd like to preface by saying that, yes, I know this one definitely should have been higher on the iceberg, but because I'm adding onto the chart as we go, I can't go back and add it higher. Still, I want to dive into it anyways. Also, before I say anything else, no, I don't support the violent beliefs and actions of the Unabomber. Industrial Society and Its Future is the manifesto of Ted Kaczynski, better known as the Unabomber, who killed 3 and injured 23 others between 1978 and 1995 in a mail-bombing terrorism campaign targeted against people who he accused of advancing modern technology and harming the environment. Due to the widely covered nature of the Unabomber, we'll be focusing less on Ted's life and more on the contents of his manifesto, where Kaczynski outlines his beliefs, many of which are largely shared ideas within the American consciousness, as well as his proposed solutions, which are, let's say, not so ubiquitous. In the fall of 1995, the 35,000-word essay appeared as a special supplement in the Washington Post. Behind the dense philosophical text was, of course, Ted Kaczynski, the Harvard-educated mathematician who had retreated to a primitive cabin in Montana. Parts of the manifesto express ideas that millions of Americans harbor and discuss all the time: that technology is advancing too quickly, modern life feels hollow, and that beneath our apparent progress lies a profound loss of autonomy and self-sufficiency. The manifesto opens with the striking declaration that, quote, "The Industrial Revolution and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race." Ted argues that modern technological society has not delivered the promised utopia, but has instead created a world where genuine human fulfillment is increasingly hard to achieve. The industrial technological system, according to Kaczynski, forces people into unnatural patterns of behavior and removes meaningful autonomy from their lives. In his view, technology was not the neutral tool that most Americans imagined, but an active force with its own momentum, one that reshapes human society to fit its requirements rather than serving authentic human needs. This is more or less an objective fact of modern life. Like many have realized by now, it is essentially impossible to live in today's interconnected world without a phone or computer. Although plenty of problems have been solved and in many ways our efficiency has increased through the use of this technology, it is impossible to argue that the world hasn't shifted to depend on the systems we have created. This perspective stands in stark contrast to the techno-optimism that dominated American culture in the mid-1990s, when the internet was emerging and digital technology promised to solve humanity's problems. Delving deeper into the Manifesto reveals one of its most psychologically penetrating concepts: surrogate activities. Kaczynski defines these as artificial pursuits that are not necessary for survival or reproduction, but which people engage in to satisfy psychological needs, especially the need to go through the power process, as he calls it, our innate drive to exercise autonomy and exert control over our lives. He outlines the process as following 4 stages: goal, effort, achievement, fulfillment. He argues that the replacements for pursuits which at one point were essential for survival have now been replaced with hollow substitutes. The consumption of entertainment, sports, political activism, climbing the corporate ladder, all of these activities Kaczynski categorizes as surrogate activities which give the illusion of meaning, but ultimately fail to satisfy our deepest needs for genuine autonomy and purpose. He argues that primitive societies naturally provided the conditions for fulfilling the power process through essential survival tasks that required skill, judgment, and effort with clear consequences. Modern technology, by making survival effortless and work increasingly abstract, has severed this connection, leaving humans desperately seeking substitute goals that never truly satisfy. Many Americans feel the same emptiness that Kaczynski describes, the sense that something essential has been lost despite material abundance. So far, these ideas seem pretty tame, common, and honestly, objectively true in many ways, and I think that's why this document makes people feel so uncomfortable. People who, out of sheer curiosity, listen to the words of the historically condemned and find that their words harbor elements of truth are prone to feel a sense of guilt. To agree with the ideas of someone as evil in the general consciousness as the Unabomber can make people feel awful or evil, and that's exactly why I'm including the Manifesto on this iceberg. Of course, just because he makes some honest points and perhaps had reasons which he believed justified his violent actions, obviously doesn't mean Kaczynski's actions were actually justified. Herein lies a sort of middle way which exists in reference to a number of complex figures throughout history, such as left and right-wing political candidates, for example. Within reason, I don't think anybody really believes that they are evil. Kaczynski, for example, believed that he was spreading an important message with the goal of returning humanity to a place of fulfillment. Although there may have been truth embedded within his beliefs, his methods, most would acknowledge, are not so agreeable. Perhaps most prophetic was Kaczynski's warning about technological control over human beings. Writing before smartphones, social media, or widespread surveillance cameras, he predicted that advancing technology would inevitably lead to increasingly oppressive forms of social control. He foresaw genetic engineering being used to modify human beings to better serve the system's needs, rather than to enhance human freedom. He described a future where technology would progressively narrow the sphere of human freedom, not through conscious malice or elite conspiracy, but through industry's inherent need for efficiency and control, a complex but nonetheless observable truth in the direction of the world today. Kaczynski's manifesto also diverges sharply from what we see as conventional political categories. While often associated with radical environmentalism by the public, his actual ideological position is far more complicated than the public consciousness seems to have the capacity to retain. He devotes substantial sections of the manifesto to criticizing leftism, which he sees as characterized by feelings of inferiority and over-socialization. Yet he equally dismisses conservatives as, quote, fools who whine about the decay of traditional values, yet enthusiastically support technological progress and economic growth. The very forces he believes are destroying those values. This independence helps explain why elements of his critique resonate across both sides of the aisle, as these positions closer to the center of the political spectrum are where most citizens of the world truly lie, if only we would stop categorizing ourselves into one sphere or the other. Both progressive critics of corporate power and conservative defenders of traditional community can find elements of their worldview reflected in his analysis, even as they reject his methods and conclusions. Kaczynski's manifesto presents a dark ecological vision. He argues that industrial civilization is inherently destructive to the natural world, not because of specific policies, but because of its fundamental structure and momentum. The continuous need for resources, energy, and expansion means that environmental destruction is not a bug, but a feature of technological society. Even green technologies, in his view, merely shift environmental impacts rather than eliminating them. Recent scholarly analysis suggests that Kaczynski's ideology wasn't fundamentally environmentalist, but rather is better described as anti-technological. His primary concern wasn't necessarily protecting nature for its own sake, but resisting technology's control over human destiny. His manifesto argues that the industrial technological system cannot be modified to become truly compatible with human freedom or ecological health. Kaczynski dismisses small-scale reforms as ultimately futile, arguing that the system will either root around them or co-opt them. It is this absolutist stance which directly leads to his most controversial conclusion that the only viable solution is revolution aimed at completely destroying the technological system. He acknowledges that the collapse of industrial society would cause immense suffering, but argues that allowing the system to develop further would ultimately result in even worse outcomes for human freedom and dignity. Kaczynski saw himself as fighting a defensive war against a system that was destroying what he valued most, and therefore, in his own twisted logic, his crimes were justified. This leap from critique to violence represents the manifesto's moral failure, and it's a failure that we are seeing more and more in today's discussions of solutions to the problems of our world. Abstract principles and ideologies separated from basic human empathy can lead to horrific conclusions and decisions. Kaczynski's inability to distinguish between opposing a system and harming innocent individuals within that system demonstrates the dangerous tunnel vision that ideological extremism can produce. After publication, many commentators noted the uncomfortable fact that parts of Kaczynski's analysis seemed coherent despite his actions. Kirkpatrick Sale, an environmentalist, described the Unabomber as, quote, a rational man with reasonable beliefs about technology. James Q. Wilson wrote in the New York Times that, quote, if it is the work of a madman, then the writings of many political philosophers, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Paine, Karl Marx, are scarcely more sane. These reactions reveal how Kaczynski's critique made people uncomfortable because it articulated anxieties already present in American culture. As Alston Chase observed in The Atlantic, the truly disturbing aspect of Kaczynski and his ideas is not that they are so foreign, but that they are so familiar. While we can still take the questions the manifesto poses about technology and humanity seriously, we must first and foremost reject the violence that Kaczynski supported. We need to ensure that basic human values serve as the benchmark by which we measure technology's progress, rather than adapting humanity's goals for these technological systems. We are observing this now with social media and, more pressingly, with the construction of AI technology, which threatens to outsource that which makes us human, our creativity, to technology. Although I obviously don't have a solution to this complex problem, I do know that it can't be born out of senseless, aimless violence. Instead, it must target the problems of collusion, corruption, and selfishness within our political and corporate systems. It is this selfishness at the top which will result in humanity's downfall, should we allow it to dig its talons through the flesh and into the bones of modern man.